Today, I wanted to bring something to your attention that's not really being discussed in the media, well, at all. The dangers of institutional investors and the danger they are placing on the property market. There have been a few surveys conducted recently, and the figures are not just staggering, they're actually terrifying. There's going to be an increase of 65% by institutional investors this year over last year. And of the 54 institutional investors who were polled, they plan to spend over 16.5 billion on property this year alone. The volume of available property throughout the UK, that's property that's up for sale on average, is running at around 60% of what it was just 20 years ago. A lot of the blame for all of this has been laid in the lap of buy-to-let investors who were encouraged from 1988 when the Housing Act of that year introduced the Section 21. But the starting point was a little further back, and that was the Housing Act in 1980. That's when the government at the time introduced the right to buy. In principle, that was a wonderful idea to give people who were renting for 5 years or more the opportunity to buy their property at a significant discount, as much as 60%. But the reality in practice was that it was very badly executed, because by design, the idea was that these people would buy their properties and the local authorities would use the money and build more properties, creating more homeowners. But in practice, whether it was down to local authorities needing the money from house sales to fill the gaps due to the draconian cutbacks in public spending that were in place at the time, whether it was intentional just to undermine government policy or a combination of both, properties were not built. And over the next few years, the amount of available properties owned by local authorities dwindled. And then in 1988, the Housing Act introduced the Section 24 to encourage private investors to buy property and make property available for rent. The problem there was that because local authorities had not been replacing property, there wasn't enough rental properties to meet demand, meaning that rental prices went up exponentially. Then, over the last few years, we have seen the tide change where the landlords, the investors, who maybe were the majority, are everyday working people who worked hard to put their money into investing, into buying a property, suddenly were subjected to a witch hunt. First of all, there was the Deregulation Act 2015, which started to make things very difficult. Then the introduction of the Section 24, and the Section 24, as the full effects were brought into effect, resulted in many individual investors, especially those who are on a fairly high income, being unable to claim for the interest payments they were making on their property, were finding themselves that from their rent they had to pay profit not only on what they were left over, but they had to pay tax on profit that they never actually received. When interest rates were 2% or less, they could wear that. A landlord of a property in London that was worth, say, 600,000 with a £300,000 mortgage at less than 2% could wear interest payments of 5,000 or 6,000 a year that they couldn't claim against the rent of 20,000, 25,000 that they would be receiving. But This year, as those interest payments have more than tripled, that's not so easy. And there are now landlords out there who are actually making a loss renting out a property. They'd be better off if it sat there empty. This is the situation that we have reached. So over the last 2-3 years, consequently, a lot of private landlords have bailed out and exited the market. But what has been happening quietly and surely behind the scenes is the amount of property that is being bought up by corporations. It's not that long ago that Lloyd's announced that they intend to be the largest landlord in the country by 2025. With billions being invested, this is not millions, it is billions. Thousands and thousands of properties are being hoovered up by corporations, and these properties will never be available to you and I again. They have bought them, they own them, and they will exploit them forever. Property is a finite commodity. Even though our stock of houses is being added to, the percentage that is being built each year as a proportion of the whole is a fraction of 1%. It is nothing. And these buyers, these corporations, are buying property faster than it is being built. This means that over the next decade or two, it is going to become increasingly harder for anybody to buy a home. It is going to be virtually impossible for those who do not have a helping hand to start several rungs up the ladder to get on the ladder anymore. We all know the famous saying from the World Economic Forum, you will own nothing and you will be happy. And this is actually happening today, now, every day. More and more people are just literally finding that it is and will most likely remain impossible for them to buy property. Even falling house prices will not help them on the ladder, because what they are gaining by falling prices, they have lost by the lack of affordability due to higher interest rates. So their buying power has slipped faster than properties have fallen, still leaving them unable to buy. But for the corporations, this next year, if property falls as we sadly expect, these corporations are going to be out on a shopping spree and they're going to be buying everything they can get their hands on. And when we do come out of this, when interest rates do begin to fall again, probably in the next 2-3 years, if not 4, we'll find the volume of available property will be even less because so much is being bought by these corporations. The government has even made it easier for them to buy property than it has for us. In other words, if you want to buy a property, an additional property to renovate, to develop, to rent out, you have to pay an additional 3% stamp duty surcharge. Yet, surprisingly enough, if you can afford to buy 6 properties or more, you don't have to pay that. So not only do these corporations who have access to unlimited resources in the order of things, they're able to buy everything, but they can buy it with less stamp duty than the average person. Therefore, this is not some conspiracy theory or anything like that. This is fact. This is actually happening. And this is why there are less and less and less properties available. And even though hundreds of thousands of buy-to-let landlords have bailed out over the last 2-3 years, those properties have not made any difference at all, because those coming to market have been literally outstripped by the volume of properties that the institutional investors are buying. And that means that the volume of property available to you and I is falling on a sliding scale, and that will only accelerate as the proportion of available property becomes lower. So therefore, the volume of properties that they are buying as a percentage of the available properties will be increasing. Last year, 15% of residential homes were bought by institutional investors. 15% in 1 year. That's 15% of all those properties that were sold last year will never come onto the market again. They are now in the hands of the elite. And where will that lead us? I've written an article about this. I've put a link in the description. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And as always, if you have any questions about anything to do with property, feel free to get in touch. And I'll see you in the next video.